Welcome to this video in the Microsoft Copilot for Security course. My name is Albert Kirkpatrick, and I'm a Microsoft trainer. To start using Microsoft Copilot for Security, organizations need to take several steps to onboard the service and users. These steps include provisioning Copilot capacity, setting up the default environment, and assigning role permissions. Provisioning capacity requires an Azure subscription and appropriate Azure roles. Setting up the default environment involves configuring settings such as capacity, data storage location, and data sharing options. Role permissions can be assigned using Microsoft Entra ID roles or Copilot for Security roles. Before users can start using Copilot, admins need to provision and allocate capacity. This requires an Azure subscription and owner and contributor role permission at minimum. There are two options for provisioning capacity. It can be done within Copilot for Security or through the Azure portal. Capacity is defined as provisioning SCUs, or security compute units. These allocate compute horsepower for Security Copilot and can be scaled so you don't run out of compute power for processing security data. This also impacts automation and real-time analysis, or even running plugins while giving the ability to not over-provision a capacity when it's not needed. This gives you the ability to not only optimize functionality, but optimize costs. Copilot for Security provides a usage monitoring dashboard so that owners can visualize the capacity that's actually being used and make adjustments to scale as necessary. To set up the default environment, you need to have one of the following Microsoft Entra ID roles: Global Administrator or Security Administrator. During setup, you'll configure settings such as SCU capacity based on the SCUs that you provisioned earlier, data storage location, such as the US, Canada, Australia, Japan, the EU, and others, and data sharing options. These settings ensure that your organization's data is stored securely and that Copilot can access the necessary data sources, allowing shared data access to capture data from Copilot for security. This data is only used for training and validation of the security data model, not any foundational models. Note that if you use Microsoft Purview, the Allow Copilot for Security to access data from your M365 services slider must be set to on. Role permissions are crucial for controlling access to Copilot for Security features. Permissions can be assigned using Microsoft Entra ID roles or Copilot for Security roles. The Entra ID roles include Global Security Administrator, Security Administrator, Security Operator, and Security Reader. Copilot for Security itself has two roles: Copilot Owner and Copilot Contributor. These roles are defined and managed within Copilot and grant access only to Copilot for Security features. So what would that look like? So let's take a short little demonstration of how we would onboard Copilot for Security. So this is the Copilot for Security standalone experience. If we come in and we're trying to provision a new Copilot for Security environment, we just need to click Get Started. And what it'll do is it'll begin to set up our tenant to be able to onboard Copilot for Security. Once that's initialized, the first thing we'll need to do is we'll need to configure a subscription, a resource group, a capacity name, and sort of like a location. Where geographically are we going to evaluate the data associated with Copilot for Security? So from the list, we'll choose the subscription we want, a resource group within that subscription, and then we'll give it a name. We'll call it Copilot for Security, capacity, and then US, for example. I'll then set a prompt evaluation location. Now, this is where geographically we're going to evaluate prompt information. This can be really important for issues of data sovereignty and also for responsiveness. So I'm going to choose the United States here. And note that if that location has too much traffic, we can allow Copilot to evaluate those prompts elsewhere, but ensure you understand the ramifications of doing that. You'll see your capacity region here is set to East US. And then you'll have to select here the number of compute units that you use with Copilot for Security. Obviously, this gives you the evaluative, or as I said earlier, the engineering horsepower to be able to grind through data and to process automation and all of that. The more compute units you allocate, obviously the more capacity you have for that, but it also impacts your cost. Note that there is a cost estimate shown beneath, and as you adjust the number of compute units associated with this, your costs will increase proportionally. Now remember, you can adjust usable compute capacity once within the amount of compute units you have provisioned through the Copilot for Security dashboard. Simply acknowledge that you read and understood the terms and conditions and click continue. And what it'll do is it'll go ahead and then begin to provision your capacity. Now, as you can see, it's telling you your data is going to be stored in the United States. And once that's complete, we'll then be able to do our initial environment setup. Boom. All right, now, there is some opportunity for you to share information with Copilot. Remember, we said the information we share is used to train a security model. It doesn't go into any of the public modeling that we have. The more we can train the model with your inputs, the more effective the model can be. So you can choose that based on your own organizational requirements, and then specify your access. As we said before, you note the default access here is for everyone who can access the environment as contributors, and then who are the owners, the global administrator and the security administrator. Now, we'll be able to modify or edit those settings kind of a little bit later on in the process. So there you go. Now you're all set. Now Security for Copilot is enabled for your organization, both in a standalone setting, but you'll also find the Copilot icon will now be available embedded within the other security tools that we've mentioned. All right? All right. And that's it. Welcome to Security for Copilot. Okay, so let's do a quick knowledge check to see how well you understand these concepts. First question, what are the steps required to onboard organizations and users to Microsoft Copilot for Security? Enable Copilot plugins and procure Microsoft Entra Premium 1 licensing, procure Entra Premium 1 licensing, or provision SCUs, set up the default environment, and assign role permissions. Let's pause a moment while you think about your answer. Yeah, that's the last part. As you saw when we walked through the demo, what we needed to do was provision the necessary resources in order to establish a baseline functionality for Copilot for Security. Here's a good question. An admin is tasked with setting up Microsoft Copilot for Security and needs to provision capacity, which is the correct method to provision capacity for their organization. 1, provision capacity through a third-party vendor. 2, provision capacity within Copilot for Security. Or 3, provision capacity by directly purchasing SCUs from a software retailer. Let's pause while you think of your answer. All right. You can provision capacity within Copilot for Security. You can add additional SCUs if needed, and you could always adjust the amount of SCUs that are allocated to a given instance of Copilot for Security. We now have the Security for Copilot environment all set for use. Remember, as we start provisioning who has what role assignments in here, the principle of least permissions, we don't want to give anyone any abilities beyond what they need to do their specific roles within Copilot. So in this section, we looked at the initial setup of the Copilot environment. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Microsoft Copilot for Security. Stay tuned for more insights and practical applications of this powerful tool. And until next time, stay secure.